It is time for one of the best DFS slates of the entire season. We get a 3-game slate for Thanksgiving, and no, it's not the most exciting games for this year by any means. We don't get the Falcons for the fun late night hammer or anything, but we do get some interesting games, and it's always fun to have these 3 games. So let's break them down and let you know who you should be using on FanDuel for Thanksgiving DFS. Welcome on in to the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for numberFire.com. Brandon, Thanksgiving slate is just around the corner, 2 days away now. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm still shaking that the Falcons thing too, because I think it's been the Falcons Saints the past 2 years. And when Julio got hurt last week, I was like, "Oh, just be healthy for the Thanksgiving slate." But it's not. They're not on it.
I've had that in my mind the whole time because I'm so used to building around the late game and utilizing late swap and stuff like that, weight swap, and it's kind of weird because I'm like, oh, it's Baltimore Pittsburgh, which is fine for real world NFL, but for DFS,
the worst part is 2 of the 3 games are divisional rematches, recent divisional rematches, and the Washington Dallas game is a little bit different because of the quarterback situations, but
offensive line situation.
I don't know, but yeah, I mean, for that reason, for a lot of reasons, the Houston and Detroit game is going to be the one I look to most, but I'm not going to be alone in that. So
and the problem is even that one had some shakiness because Kenny Golladay did practice on Monday, but it's also not a lock that he plays because he practiced last Wednesday too and still didn't play. So if he doesn't go, there's a chance that the Lions just fall flat again. So even the best game on the slate has paths to failure, which I think is going to lead to some interesting discussion here because we need to find ways to differentiate. We need to find some players who may fly under the radar, but also just find the players who deserve to be the core plays for us at each position. We'll do that here in just 1 second. But first, Thanksgiving obviously is upon us, and FanDuel is giving you the opportunity to win big this holiday season. For just $5.55, you can enter the NFL Thanksgiving Million and compete for your share of the $1.5 million prize pool, including a $500,000 first place prize. Take your pick of Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, Zeke Elliott, and so many more, and follow along as the games unfold to track your progress. Thursday is just a few days away, so download the FanDuel mobile app and submit your lineups today. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. We also do have a listener league for this week. It is not for the Thanksgiving slate, though. It is for the Week 12 main slate. That is now posted. You can go to FanDuel.com/league/listener league, FanDuel.com/league/listener league. You can also get a link in the Week 11 recap podcast post up on numberFire.com, which we recorded yesterday. Week 12 DFS previews tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube page, and posts on the numberFire daily fantasy podcast feed immediately after that. Let's dive in here to this Thanksgiving slate. Before we talk about the first game, which is that Detroit against Houston game, we wanted to go through past Thanksgiving million winner lineups and see if we could find some takeaways here, because obviously strategies for a 3-game slate are very different than they are for a full slate. And, a lot of you, I'm sure, are playing 4 p.m. only slates and stuff like that pretty regularly. So it's not as if a short slate is totally out of nowhere to you. But a lot of people may be playing, this could be their first year for the first time. Maybe you don't play those other slates. It's useful to look back at what has been successful in the past. So, Brandon, you pulled data on which lineups have won the Thursday million or the Thanksgiving million contest in the past. What did you find when looking at that data?
Yeah, so we have 2 years with the flex on FanDuel. Before that, there was a kicker. I'm still going to dig back another 2 years to whatever the Thanksgiving million equivalent really was. So really, we're looking at 4 slates, 12 games. You could be sitting there thinking this is all pointless, but I still think it's worthwhile to dig in and see if anything stands out. The 4 top lineups in these contests, which were all 150 entries, they pretty much all spend all the salary. 2 of them spent $6,000 exactly. There was a $59 800 and a 59 700. So basically, saving salary is going to be a way to differentiate, but it wasn't necessarily the best way to hit a top lineup over the past few years. On these lineups, at least one player has been on 50% of rosters. So it's probably pretty unavoidable, but I think that means that you don't have to try to fade every popular or good process play across the board. I don't think that's really a plus EV strategy for the long run. I think you can find other ways to differentiate. And if you look at the average roster rate among all the players, it's about 32%. So if you sum that up, it's about 260. So if you do factor in popularity, that's kind of the rate typically for a Sunday Million winner. It's about 165% on like the max. So obviously more chalky. There are fewer games to pick from, but that's one way if you do kind of figure in projected popularity that you can kind of, I just wanted to throw that out there because that is something that I try to factor in, make sure I'm not, getting lineups that it's every single chalky play. And then for some positional trends and some stacking, all of the past 4 winning lineups have had a quarterback stacked with a wide receiver or a tight end, but there's only been one pass catcher in these lineups. It's not the mega stacks. It's not a quarterback plus 2 receivers or a receiver and a tight end. That's something that I typically do a lot of on a short slate. That's probably bad process, at least based on how these lineups have returned. 3 of the past 4 have also had the running back team defense stack that we all love. So I think that's viable. But I think one of the key takeaways is that 3 of the 4 years have actually had a quarterback and running back from the same team, which also means a quarterback. So we've had a quarterback and running back from the same team, which is something that I try to shy away from, because if you think about it, if a running back scoring a touchdown, the quarterback's not scoring a touchdown, but for a running back to put up a big game, the offense generally has to do a lot, be efficient. So a quarterback and running back has been a popular pair, and we haven't seen, again, a double wide receiver stack, but the going with a quarterback, running back, and receiver has been pretty strong, which is something that I generally try to avoid. There have been at least 3 skill position players from a single team on all 4 of these winning lineups, not a 4-man stack. So again, something I tend to think about, if an offense goes off, it could be such that 4 players get into that lineup, but that hasn't actually been the case. There's actually only been one instance of 2 receivers from the same team being in the same lineup. That was Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones, but didn't even have Matt Ryan as the quarterback. So there's actually another one. It was Antonio Brown and Kobe Hamilton. Kobe Hamilton scored 1 point. So, again, this speaks against the double receiver stack, which is something that intuitively I would think would be smart in case a team does erupt. But we need top tier performances, and we don't have that many games we can choose from. So I think the takeaways here, I know is probably a lot, might have been a little bit boring, but I think it was super helpful for me. I think I learned a thing or two. I'm much less afraid to stack a quarterback and a running back. I usually was not on that train. And I'm also less inclined to stack a quarterback with multiple pass catchers. So I think those are 2 very important trends for me to keep in mind as I build my lineups. I don't know if anything jumped out here to you. We could maybe just not put any stock into this 4-slate sample, but I think it was actually pretty helpful.
I think that one thing that's helpful is the quarterback, the 3-player stack discussion, because we do that decently often on full slates, but it makes sense to be more viable on a mini slate. So what we like to do and talk about here with small slates is making assumptions. And I think that what you do is you plug in your quarterback, plug in 2 players who would benefit if that player goes off on his team, most likely a running back in there, as you alluded to, and then whatever it be on the opposing team that would also benefit. I think that that's kind of the assumption you build around. Build the assumption around your quarterback and then go from there. I actually do quarterback running back stacks a lot because I think there are 2 scenarios in which quarterback running back stacks are really attractive. The first one is where if using the 2 players together gets you access to every yard the team accumulates, like Dak and Zeke at some points have been that way, where if you use them together, you're getting every point the Cowboys offense scores effectively. And also, every yard they accumulate. Yeah. I like that situation. Also, if they're a pass catching back, obviously too. So if DeAndre Swift were healthy, it'd make a lot of sense to pair with Matthew Stafford. So I actually tend to go quarterback, running back a lot anyway. I think I'm more inclined to do it here just because, like you said, it tends to pay off pretty often. So I think that what I would do is every lineup I start with, okay, this is the team I assume will be going off. I will plug in Deshaun Watson, I'll plug in Will Fuller, and then I'll go Jordan Akins or Duke Johnson. Like, I think that that's the way you do it, and then you run it back to the opposing team and then fill it out from there. Is that kind of where you wind up as well?
Yeah, I think on this slate, with how running back shakes out, there's not a great example of this. But again, historically and intuitively, to me, I would say, well, if I'm playing Andy Dalton, I'm playing the angle that Zeke doesn't score touchdowns. But that's actually not kind of what has been getting these top tier lineups again on this small slate. So again, it's a small sample, but Andy Dalton and Ezekiel Elliott is going to be a combination that I have that historically I wouldn't have before just kind of digging into this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing too is we've really to dig into the running backs because I don't think there's a lot of separation for this week. So I think that it gives more credence to the idea of just going with whichever team you think does best. If that means you're using a running back you don't like that much, Duke Johnson, James Conner, et cetera, like you might have to do it. So I think that's another reason to lean on this strategy, looking at those past winning lineups, is that we can use that as a way to decide, hey, we're not really into the running backs. We'll let this dictate where we decide to go here. I think that's where I'm at. Any other things for you with regards to those winning lineups or with regards to small slates in general?
I always want to look at like correlations, but correlations only kind of they stick over a large sample, but you can see weird stuff where like two uncorrelated plays actually do perform well in the same game. So as much as I want to say don't ever play this type of play and the other type of play, like it's a small slate, anything can happen. But I will say one thing. Team defenses they're always tricky for a small slate like this because you don't want to play defenses against your offensive players, but points allowed don't really accumulate a lot of FanDuel points for defenses. About 57% of fantasy points come from sacks and interceptions. So volatility is great. Don't be too afraid to play a defense against your offensive players. Don't actively target it, but you don't have to.
You're going to have to at some point. Yeah. So yeah, embrace that for sure. All right, let's dive in here to the game, starting off with the one between the two worst defenses on the slate. That is Houston against Detroit. Total here, 51.5. Houston is a 2.5-point favorite. The look-ahead line, I believe, was Detroit minus 1.5. So last week's showing, not great for the views of the Detroit Lions offense via the eyes of the bookmakers here. Couple of injuries to note here. DeAndre Swift missed another practice on Monday with a concussion. Danny Amendola is out as well. Now, I will say with DeAndre Swift, my assumption is that he will not play. However, there are several hurdles he needs to clear in concussion protocol, and I believe one of those is getting into practice. The Lions did not practice Monday, therefore I don't think he can clear that hurdle. So I think my assumption is he's not going to play. But I'm not going to, I will talk about DeAndre Swift in case he does play because, I don't think it's totally, based on the way concussion protocol works, I don't think it's a lock that he is necessarily out. I would assume that he is, though. Kenny Golladay was limited. Again, he was limited last Wednesday, ultimately wound up sitting. So, he's not a lock to play either, but I would say he's closer to 60%, whereas Swift is closer to maybe 10% to play. The Texans will be without Kenny Stills and Randall Cobb for sure. Laramie Tunsil missed practice on Wednesday. He also missed week 11 with an illness. It's possibly plays. Tunsil's good enough where he probably does need to practice to play, and it is a sickness rather than an injury. But it was bad enough where he did have to sit out last week. So, and they played well enough without him. So it's not like a major deviation, but definitely would be good for them if their franchise left tackle were to play. Let's dive in here to the game notes around this game, Brandon. Obviously, I think this is the number one game to stack on this slate, right? We're not going to be too crazy here.
No. So this slate is always the most fun to talk about on the year, but it's also a little troublesome because we want to play it a little bit with that game theory mindset where we don't want to just play the most obvious, chalkiest plays, but we also want to recommend the best process plays. So for that reason, yeah, this is the best game to stack for sure. You don't have to get cute and pretend like it is not stackable. But that said, in theory, you're probably getting a lot of leverage by being a little bit lighter on this game because it does stand out so much relative to the other two.
Yeah. It's just so hard.
I always struggle with that. Like Deshaun Watson, best play at quarterback, but everyone knows that. So
right. I think the one angle that is like kind of interesting is not using Deshaun at quarterback, but still stacking this game outside of Deshaun. Maybe using Lamar Jackson at quarterback as like a naked option, and then stacking the game beyond Deshaun Watson. Going Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, et cetera, guys like that. I think that's an angle that I could play in order to get a little bit different, because if they have Lamar at quarterback, they're less likely to stack this game. I think that is a viable route for doing so. But when we look at this game individually, what stands out to you as being the things that are impacting the way you're viewing it?
Just so much of it depends on the Lions' status. Not even just in the sense that the Lions themselves would have volume and value opened up. It would be, can they keep it close? And without Kenny Golladay and or DeAndre Swift, they're just not that good of an offense based on what we've seen. In games without Kenny Golladay, Matthew Stafford averages 0.05 passing net expected points per drop back. The NFL average on the full season is 0.14. So he's just not efficient enough in games without Golladay to feel great about. Can you use Matthew Stafford even without Golladay? Yes, we have 6 quarterbacks. But in games with Golladay, he's at 0.24 passing net expected points per drop back, which is almost like twice the league average. Not quite, obviously, but so he's a very different quarterback. This is a very different offense, and that's something that can get lost in the shuffle. It's not just about volume and targets. Is the offense moving the ball? Are they scoring touchdowns? Are they actually gaining yardage? And that matters a lot. So the number one takeaway for me in this game is like it's very different if Kenny Golladay cannot play, because that's also going to hurt, in theory, the Houston offense.
Right. And I think that's a key thing for me is that if Golladay can't go, the incentive to not use the Texans becomes higher. So I think that is the biggest injury on this slate is Kenny Golladay, outside of the Ravens backfield situation with COVID stuff. But I think like if Golladay plays, I'd be very comfortable going to him right away, because in the games he's played, 23% of the targets, 41% of the deep targets, which is just a massive number. So like he'd be a very good wide receiver play. And I think that he would be the obvious spring back option. If Golladay does go, it kind of kills Marvin Jones. Like he has a 13% target share in games with Golladay. He's $6,000 and like, sure, that's fine, but like, I don't know. But like, if Golladay can't go, Marvin Jones is totally different. His target share goes up to 19%. He has 46% of the team's deep targets since Galladay's most recent interest in the past 3 games. And he has 24% of the red zone targets. So he gets a lot of high leverage looks. So does TJ Hawkinson. Hawkinson's overall target share stays pretty static, but he gets 27% of the deep targets without Golladay compared to 5% with Golladay. So basically, Hawkinson and Marv are the only guys who get downfield work. So if Golladay can't go, I think that Marvin and Hawkinson become both like relatively good plays. I'm not a huge Marvin Jones guy, but he has been better from a yardage perspective recently. Maybe not as much of a non-factor as he had been before. So I think if Golladay goes, you use him, and you can still use Hawkinson, but you definitely lower yourself on Marv. If Golladay does not go, Marv at $6,000 is the obvious bring back option, and Hawkinson gets a bump up. Stafford, the other thing that's noteworthy with him without Golladay is that his ADOT goes down to 6.8. It is 9.0 in the games with Kenny Golladay. That's a major deviation.
And it was 5.9 last week when he, with everything in his hand.
Right, because there was no Danny Amendola there to stretch the field, which also obviously impacted things. So even lower. I think that the lower salary guys might be tough. Like Jamal Agnew had 6 targets and 57 air yards on Sunday against the Panthers. as we're recording, he's not in the FanDuel player pool. I would guess he'd be added. I'm going to make that assumption personally. Yeah. He'll probably be like around 5,000 or so. He's interesting. I'd probably go Marvin Hall over him, though. Hall ran 30 routes last week per Pro Football Focus. Hasn't gotten a lot of targets, but he gets downfield work and he's fast. So I would go Hall over Agnew. Agnew's fast too, obviously. But like I would go Hall over Agnew. What's your level of confidence in those guys if there's no Galladay?
Those two, Hall and Agnew.
Yeah. Well, I guess everyone. Sorry, I didn't get. Let's talk about Marvin either.
No, I mean I'm with you. We're looking at a lot of the same data, a lot of the same splits. If you look at games without Galladay, Marv's at 6.8 targets per game, but that's 8.8 if you weight them for the fact that he gets red zone work, end zone targets, downfield work. So I'm on the same page with you with Marv and Hawkinson with and without Galladay, but the level of confidence in Marvin Hall and Jamal Agnew very low. And I would probably have a hard time not just building the same lineup and then duplicating it. And so that I have the same lineup, one with Marvin Hall, one with Agnew, just in case, because that would be a very stressful situation if you kind of hit everything else, but you guess wrong on Hall and Agnew. But, they're only in play if Kenny Galladay's out. If DeAndre Swift were to play and Galladay would be out, it'd still kind of be lower on them. You would think that he would just handle more of the workload. And, for what it's worth, Kerryon Johnson was a little bit involved last week, much more involved than Adrian Peterson in negative game script. I would assume there's negative game script here. Just my assumption. That's how I would, again, you got to make those assumptions. If you think that the Lions get out ahead, you can play Adrian Peterson. But other than that, I'm not going to touch him. So I will have some Agnew, some Hall, but they're really not you can't really build around those guys. Not that anyone's really thinking about that, but even on a small slate, you don't have to build around Jamal Agnew or Marvin Hall.
Yeah.
You don't have to get that weird. You got to use them and be open to it, but really the winning lineups don't really have that many off the wall plays.
I would also say that there are more attractive, lower salary players in other games.
Snead.
Yeah, Willie Snead. It's Willie Snead. But I think that is another reason why I'm not super itchy to go with those guys. Regarding Kerryon, he is $4,900, 70% snap rate last week, as you said, in super negative game script. 5 targets. He had 16 total adjusted opportunities, which is carries plus 2x targets, because targets were twice as much as carry for running backs on FanDuel. So he's $4,900. I think that obviously we would both agree that using a non-running back in the flex is more viable on a 3-game slate. Would you rather flex Kerryon Johnson, Marvin Hall, or Jamal Agnew if both Swift and Galladay sit? I think I'd go Kerryon there personally.
I think I would. I mean, there's still a touchdown chance. If you're playing Marvin Hall and Jamal Agnew, you need them to score a touchdown. One catch for even 60 yards it's going to be fine, but you're going to, again, it's not a single game slate. That might have a lot more appeal on a single game. But the idea that they get enough volume necessarily to put up the yardage without a touchdown. We have 3 other games. We have other viable lower salaried receivers, like you said. So I would flex Kerryon, again, assuming no DeAndre Swift.
Let's assume that DeAndre Swift magically becomes healthy. How are you viewing him at $7,200?
I think you have to go
72.
You'd have to get very heavy because the other running backs don't particularly stand out. I'm much more okay, it sounds like, with Ezekiel Elliott than you might be.
But no, I'm okay with him. I just think that he's very oversalaried. I'm going to use him because he's a straight-up best play, but he's oversalaried by a lot.
Right. Per dollar in salary, if Swift plays, he's pretty – unless you throw in Gus. But among the higher salaried backs, DeAndre Swift would be the number one by far.
I pulled each guy's total yardage per game in their most relevant sample, and Swift is at 89.7. Nobody else in the slate is above 77.6, which is Antonio Gibson. So, he's got a big yardage gap on everyone else.
What's Zeke's sample for you with Dalton?
5 full games without Dak. Because that first game without Dak, he lost 2 fumbles, and his snap rate's gone down to about 70% in that time. So it is those 5 games. He's at 24 adjusted opportunities per game in that time and 77.4 yards per game.
Yeah, we'll get there. Just a very different offense, but I understand what you're saying. I think so. We're both on the same page. Swift would be the standout among, let's call it the top five with Duke Johnson, James Conner, Antonio Gibson, Swift, and Zeke. At their salary, Swift would be number one.
Yeah, it's between him and Zeke, I think, but like I think it's Swift, right?
I think so. For 1,300 in savings, yes.
Okay.
Of course, with Gus Edwards, it's a lot more.
There
open.
are some red flags there, which we'll talk about later on. But I think that it would be Swift probably number one for me. Let's talk about the Texans here. Deshaun Watson, $8,700, the highest salary player on the entire slate, but for good reason. Since the head coaching change, 6.2 rushes for 35.2 yards per game. And you may say, hey, he had a rushing touchdown last week. He's going to regress. That's the only rushing touchdown he's had since then. So actually, like, he's still due for positive rushing touchdown progression, probably. So I think that Watson, obviously the number one quarterback in this slate. Just a question of, do you go there? I think you go there pretty often because the production is so stable. Despite the fact that we're popular, you differentiate elsewhere. As far as the wide receivers go, I am going to stick to ranking Will Fuller higher, and I think it's an interesting discussion, so I want to ask you about this too. But Fuller in the games, both season, has 21% of the targets. Brandon Cooks at 22%. Fuller has 31% of the deep targets. Cooks at 26%. They both have similar red zone shares. Cooks is the highest scoring game between the two for the season at 26.1 FanDuel points, but Fuller has been the highest scorer between the two in 6 out of 10 games. I think they both get boosts with Randall Cobb and Kenny Stills out. So I'm going Fuller over Cooks if I have one lineup. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, the threat of Will Fuller is scary enough. And if targets are similar overall, you should look at things like downfield targets, average depth of target. Fuller leads in both of those. So even on the full season with a game where Will Fuller has no targets back in week 2 against Baltimore, they're still about the same when you weight their targets for where they are. So if you kind of factor out that game, Will Fuller does lead. He would be the priority for me.
Yeah, I think that he kind of has to be. I think that Cooks is like still a very good play. Looking at the wide receivers in the 6,000 range, I think you go with the Pittsburgh guys above him probably, but then I would probably put Cooks next. I guess there's not a lot of guys in that range, but I'd probably rank Claypool and Johnson ahead of him, but Cooks would probably be number 3 on that list for me. So Cooks is still a good play. Fuller's just a better play, I think. With Stills and Cobb banged up last week, Cutie had 4 targets. He played 57% of the snaps. He had 1 deep target along with 3 in the red zone. And like when Cutie was like a thing a couple years ago, I know he got a ton of red zone work there too. So like he's not going to get 3 red zone targets every week, but like maybe he'll be more involved there. I don't like Cutie that much despite these things. Like again, I'd rather go with a Willie Snead type guy among lower salaried players. Cutie relative to Marvin Hall and Jamal Agnew is a bit of a different discussion, but what are your thoughts on Cutie here at $4,500?
I'd probably prefer him to the Lions guys just because he should be 3rd on the pecking order, at least among receivers. I guess it just depends a lot on what you think the Lions can do in this game on the other side. If there's no Kenny Golladay, I don't know if Cutie really needs to be a factor in this game.
True.
So a lot of it has to do with what's on the other end. They still spread the ball out enough with touchdowns where I think Cutie's in play. But I think I would still prefer him if I had to pick between Cutie and Hall and Agnew. I think just by the sheer fact that it's Hall or Agnew versus Cutie, I think it's a little easier to go with Cutie.
Yeah.
And we've seen more from him, at least in his career, than those other 2 guys.
I've seen him be inactive a lot too. So I know the coaching staff is not as huge of a fan, which is part of the reason why I am hesitant at best.
Yeah.
But, he's minimum salary, so I can't nitpick too much. As far as tight end goes, Jordan Akins is not at the top of my list, but I think that I prefer him over Cutie among like just generic low salary players in the Texans. He is $5,200. He has a 12% target share since returning and 19% of the deep targets. It's not a great profile, but he has yardage upside, and I think that's fun for a tight end. The problem is tight end's actually not bad for this slate. Like Eric Ebron's viable, Logan Thomas is viable, Mark Andrews is viable, TJ Hawkinson is viable. So
we got 6 guys basically.
Yeah, like
one from each team, effectively.
Dalton Schultz might.
Sure, but like in theory, it's not like we're looking at who was it, Jaden Graham, I think last year or the year before or something.
Don't you dare speak ill of Jaden Graham. Jaden Graham caught like a 40-yard pass on like the first drive. It was amazing. How dare you? Why would you do the drive-by of Jaden Graham? Come on.
I'm just saying,
get
like,
out of here.
Name value.
No, get out of here. This is terrible. I'm offended.
All the tight ends are $5,000 or more in salary. That's wild.
Are you on the same page with me with Akins?
Over
where
Cutie?
It's like he's fine, but I'd rather have him over Cutie.
Yes. Realistically, I'll probably try to spread out most at tight end just because tight end's that position.
Yeah, I agree. Duke Johnson, let's talk about him. He's $6,100. That is the lowest of the non-Gus Edwards like lead backs. In his most relevant sample, which is the past 3 games, with David Johnson leaving pretty early in the first one. Yeah. Duke has 13.3 carries per game, 3.3 targets, which amounts to 20 adjusted opportunities. He's at 54 yards per game because he's legitimately horrendous. But like he's facing the Lions, and if I make the assumption that Texans go off, Duke does well there. Now, if I'm ranking running backs, and I think I might just do this now because why not? Let's assume that DeAndre Swift sits. I'm going to rank them Zeke 1, Gus Edwards 2, Antonio Gibson 3, James Conner 4, Duke Johnson 5. So Duke is still pretty low on my list, but he's a 5 that I'm willing to filter in for sure. Where are you on Duke Johnson?
I'd rank the same, but I'd flip Duke over James Conner.
That's fair. I mean, they're the same person, except
James Conner he's got a much just worse matchup. That game could put up a lot of points.
And it's not matchup from like a rushing perspective because like it doesn't really matter that much. It's more so like overall defense. Like how many points will that team score? Because like the Ravens aren't a tough rushing matchup, but it doesn't matter because their overall defense is very good.
Yeah, it's like a top down. Right. And the Steelers put up 28 on them in week 8. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I think Duke Johnson has very minimal resistance, even though based on next gen stats, he's the worst. I think I made this note. I think he's the worst running back in rushing yards versus expectation.
Yep. And CJ Prosise got some work last week. And like, this is me just like still hoping for Scotty Phillips for the Dynasty League shares that I now have. Like I love, they brought him up from the practice squad last week. Maybe they'll do it again here. Maybe they'll eventually let him play. But like, I think that Duke deserves to be 5, despite the fact that his role is in theory good.
I mean, I'm going to flip a coin between James Conner and Duke Johnson a lot because I don't view them as significantly different.
They're not. They're the same person, except one of them is thought of more highly than the other. Actually, they're both thought of pretty highly. I take that back.
That's true. People love Duke.
Okay. Final thoughts for you on this game before we move on.
Give me your favorite game stack.
I'm going to go to Deshaun Watson, Will Fuller. If I'm doing this, I would probably put Duke in there, and then I would run it back with, assuming Galladay plays, I would go Galladay. Like, it's going to force me to scramble elsewhere, but I know that I can, especially with Duke in there.
Yeah, I think Fuller probably stands out more than Cooks the more I think about it, just from a salary standpoint. So I would go similar, Watson, Duke, Fuller, probably like Hawkinson. If Galladay plays, I love him, obviously, but that's what you just said. But I think Hawkinson works as a tight end.
Yeah, and like we said, Hawkinson is in play either way, but just gets a bump up if Galladay does not go because of the deep volume. Let's move now to Washington at Dallas. The total in this game has gone down. It was originally 48. It is now 46.5. Cowboys favored by 3 here, and I think that what's interesting about this game is that both these teams operate at a decently fast pace. The Cowboys second in situation neutral pace per Football Outsiders, Washington 14th. So if you want to play the angle of looking for alternative routes, I would bet this game winds up being the least popular potentially. So I actually don't mind it for stacking. For injuries, Antonio Gibson and Terry McLaurin both missed practice Monday with ankle injuries. I was looking at beat reporters and they're tweeting about this, and they didn't really note it. So I don't think it's something that's too terribly concerning, but it is at least worth noting that Gibson and McLaurin couldn't practice Monday, and if they can't go, that's going to lower the appeal of the entire game because they're two catalysts for a shootout.
They are the Washington offense, basically.
How dare you besmirch J.D. McKissick like this? Anyway, what are your thoughts on this game?
We'll get there. A Week 7 rematch. Kyle Allen was under center. This is a game where Andy Dalton got hurt with that scary hit. It was a 25-3 win for Washington, so probably not the most predictive game to dig into. But
it's also noteworthy that Dallas did not have Zach Martin or Joe Looney in that game. Zach Martin is like one of the best guards in football. Joe Looney is not like great, but like it's better to have your starting center.
You need to tell me this.
Yeah. Offensive line guru Brandon Gadula. Like it's a different offense than it was then.
Yeah, and more specifically, like with Andy Dalton, he's not amazing. He's at negative 0.01 passing net expected points per drop back. He's got a 6.1 ADOT, but Garrett Gilbert and Ben DiNucci combined for negative 0.3 passing net expected points per drop back. So it's like a third of a point per play better with Dalton, and even though he's still like 1.5 points worse than average. So I don't think we can understate what this offense has been through between the time of like Dalton's return and his injury. So like the receivers, not really on the forefront of anyone's minds, but I think the arrow's way up on them. It's obviously not like a groundbreaking statement based on we saw life last week from this offense, but everyone's going to want to play the Pittsburgh guys, I think, especially if Juju were to miss, and everyone is probably going to be in on the Houston offense. So I don't think, obviously, this team's not going to go completely overlooked, but I do think that the receivers here have a lot of value, specifically Amari Cooper. He's been way more efficient on his volume from Andy Dalton than CeeDee Lamb. On similar volume, it's really not close. Even yards per target, like it's a cavern. I wrote about it on numberFire for the primer. So I think Amari Cooper he's had some Thanksgiving memories. So I think Amari Cooper is a really standout play.
And the other thing too is you look at the deep volume and it favors Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb, but like Andy Dalton's not hitting them on the deep volume he's giving them. His ADOT is
6.1.
6.1, thank you. His deep rate is 12%. So although Michael Gallup has 36% of his deep targets, I think he's caught like one or two, and CeeDee Lamb has caught one deep ball. And like at some point you got to catch it.
Yeah, the targets, the deep targets are 5 for Gallup, 4 for Lamb, 2 for Cooper, to put like a number 2.
And Cooper has one catch on those two targets. So like I think that I'd agree where even though Cooper is the highest salary, to rank him first, might go Gallup second because he's $5,500. I know Lamb had a good game last week, and I used a good amount of Lamb, but the salary savings on Gallup I think are really, really attractive, and I think that's enough. Let's talk about the running backs here. We'll get to the receivers again, but I want to talk about the running backs here because I think that they're kind of the headliner here. I think that Zeke, like I said, is number one. It's not again, I think he's oversalaried. I think that his salary is terrible, but I still think he's number one. He's $8,500. I think he's number one. I think Antonio Gibson is number 2 on the slate. So I think both the best running backs. Sorry, Gus. I think that Gibson's number 3 on the slate. So 2 of the top 3 running backs in the slate, assuming that Swift sits, are in this game. The reason I like Gibson so much is that he gets every red zone touch. If you look from week 2 on, because in week 1 was the Peyton Barber week, from week 2 on, Gibson has 31% of the team's red zone market share. That is carries and targets included. So it factors in how rush heavy they are in the red zone. And Gibson is at 31%. Zeke in the games without Dak is at 27%. I believe Gibson is number 1. Yeah, he's number 1 on the slate in red zone market share in his most relevant sample. So I think that Gibson, I tend to be lower on him than others, but I think I'm probably going to be in line with consensus this week just because I think he's a great option. I think it's possible people wind up being higher on him than I am, but that's not a situation where I want to fade him. It's just like I can't quite get as high as them. What are your thoughts on these two running backs here?
Just the two, not the three?
No, there are only two in here.
Okay. Well, Zeke is the best play at running back. You can feel the best about his volume. Even at the salary, he's going to have the best volume. Finally got to 100 yards last week. The offensive line's healthier. Played 70% of the snaps. Washington does rate out as a good rush defense, but I don't particularly care about that. And for whatever it's worth, I don't know if it's a whole lot, but Zeke had 2 targets last week, scored on one of them. Tony Pollard did not have a target, so I don't know if that's...
He had a long touchdown, rushing touchdown, but yeah.
But I'm looking specifically at the targets.
Yeah. And he was a full practice on Monday with that hamstring injury too, Zeke was. So that's good.
So I think Zeke's easily the number one. Antonio Gibson is a much more interesting discussion because he's going to be popular for a reason. Like it's warranted, but there's also a little bit to be worried about. He's been very efficient in Alex Smith's 3 starts. Not a ton of carries, just based on how the offense has flowed, but a lot of red zone opportunities, like you said, so I won't dig into that. But he has 4 rushing touchdowns over the past 3 games, and even with those, his FanDuel point totals are 11, 20.5, and 16.9, which, yeah, like those are especially great for a small slate, but he's not really going off in the yardage department. He's been very touchdown dependent, and it's very possible he does not score a touchdown. And without that, we're looking at just the yardage and maybe not a whole lot of receiving work. The receiving work's a little bit better, but J.D. McKissic's still that guy to me. You might feel differently. In this same sample, McKissic's at 12.7, 14.4, and 8.4 FanDuel points. I know that McKissic had his volume dropped last week, but if you look whenever they've been trailing by 7 points or more, which I believe in this Cowboys offense now, and I would view this, my assumption would be that the Cowboys play from ahead. I think McKissic is very involved. He has 10 targets over the past 2 games whenever they've been trailing by at least 7. I think Gibson's at 2 targets. I sent it to you in Slack, but he's still involved. I think we could get a little bit of bias based on the extremely recent sample with McKissic. So I do think J.D. McKissic is more in play than we might think otherwise.
I do want to justify ranking Zeke first, because I feel like that might be semi-contrarian.
Is it takey?
No, I don't think it's takey, but I think we should justify it.
Okay.
So I looked at each running back's most relevant sample, which was just, I decided what it was. There's no science here. But Zeke's was 5 games without Dak, and in that time, he is at 24 adjusted opportunities per game. If we take Swift off the slate, nobody else above 20.4, which is James Conner, who stinks. And the yardage hasn't been great for Zeke, but I would project the yardage to get better, A, with Andy Dalton, the quarterback, and B, with the offensive line being healthier than it was at times in that split. So Zeke has looked like, if you watch the games, I can understand why you like Tony Pollard, because Tony Pollard is objectively juicier. But Zeke's juice, quote unquote, should get better because the situation around him is better. He topped 100 yards for the first time all year this past week. So I think that Zeke is justifiable as the top play on the slate, even though, again, I am viewing him as being oversalaried. I think that the arrow is trending up on this offense, like you said. So maybe that's the angle we play for the slate. If we want to get weird, is we just stack the Cowboys as our assumption. Would you include Andy Dalton? Or actually, do you want to talk about Zeke first? I'm getting sidetracked here.
No, this is the hardest pod to do because it's a little more free flowing. But I think the thing for me with Zeke is I'm not that afraid of Tony Pollard. He's very good and he can break off long runs, but he's not that involved necessarily. 7, 9, and 5 carries the past 5 games with that long touchdown that you alluded to. It's not like he's not involved, but the targets haven't really been there either in recent games. And if Ezekiel Elliott is not going to be scripted out, which is possible, if he fumbles, we might not see as much Zeke as we saw last week when he played 70% of the snaps. But it's not like we have Antonio Gibson has issues. He can get scripted out. We can't just pretend that's over with. James Conner can get scripted out. He can get taken out at the goal line. Duke Johnson's not very good. Ezekiel Elliott, to me, just has the fewest concerns. I know the salary's up there, but we have the value to get to him. I don't think that it's egregious to put Ezekiel Elliott number one, and I think he should be number one pretty easily.
I agree. So I think we'll be different in that because people will probably take the salary savings for like Gus and Gibson, and I'm okay being overweight on Zeke. That's fine with me personally, given the circumstances working in his favor. Let's start with the pass catchers here on the Washington side. I think this offense kind of changed gears in the second half against Detroit back in week 10, and they stopped just dumping it to McKissick on every play. So what I wanted to look at was their past 6 quarters, because they kind of took a similar approach in the week 11 game. In that time, Alex Smith has a 6.7 yard ADOT. That's low, but actually higher than Dalton. He's at 0.16 passing net expected points per dropback, which is pretty good, and a 15.3% deep rate, which is below average, but again, above Dalton. So I actually think that Alex Smith might be the better quarterback play than Dalton. Am I dumb?
No. I think, look, we've seen, and this is a problem with how fantasy points are accumulated. We've seen Alex Smith put up some fantasy points, mostly through passing yardage. He had 325 3 games ago, 390, and then 166 when the volume dropped off. But he doesn't throw a lot of touchdowns, just 2 in his 3 starts. So he's actually maxed out at 16 FanDuel points despite throwing for almost 400 yards in one game because he didn't throw for a touchdown. So, like, I think
I disagree with myself. I should go Dalton higher.
I'm gonna lean Dalton. I believe I don't just believe in that offense. Like,
you're right.
Based on all the data, I believe in the offense. He has way more playmakers.
You're right.
So I'm gonna go with Dalton. But no,
right.
I don't think it's. We have 6 quarterbacks. We got to look at everyone.
Yeah.
But I think this is probably a cautionary tale as well. Historically, when I play the Thanksgiving slate, I'm like, well, I want to play a lot of Deshaun, but I can't play every lineup with Deshaun, so I want to get a lot of Lamar. That's like, well, Ben Roethlisberger is in a tough defense, but I love the way to stack him. And it's like, well, but then Andy Dalton's sneaky too, and then by the end of it, I'm playing all 6 quarterbacks, and
right.
You really get yourself in a bind because the odds then that you hit on, like, if your goal is just to have a lineup with every quarterback so that you can feel good if one of them goes off, that's fine. But if you really want to hit a big lineup and you just are spread out all over the place, the odds that you actually get the right combination decrease drastically. So
yeah,
I think I'm going to just rule out Alex Smith.
Probably fair. I should probably do that too. I actually might not use either quarterback in this game despite liking it. I might just build like maybe this is a good Lamar situation where I use Lamar at quarterback and then stack this game for the other spots.
I will say, if there's no Kenny Golladay, or we think that Matthew Stafford's just not 100%, Dalton is easily the best value at quarterback, and by building around a value quarterback, that is a way to differentiate. So I do think that there's some merit for Andy Dalton, but again, a lot of that just depends on Kenny Golladay because he's pretty much the most important player on the slate at this point.
Yeah, I think that Dalton would be my favorite if Golladay can't go. If Golladay can go, it's easily Stafford at 72. So hopefully Golladay plays because I'd rather use Matthew Stafford. Okay, let's talk about the pass catchers here. Terry McLaurin is $7,900. In that 6-quarter sample I talked about before, he has 23% of the targets and 33% of the deep targets. That's not a big sample. I think it's 9 deep targets for Smith in that time, but 33% is pretty good. He's had good yardage in the games with Smith as the primary quarterback. He's had, I think, 84 or more in all 3 of them, and I like yardage.
He's averaging 98.
Yeah, and we can talk down about Alex Smith's ADOT, but he's getting yardage still, and I think that does matter. So if we're looking at all the wide receivers in this game, or pass catchers, let's say, I would probably I think I might go Amari 1 still. I go McLaurin 2. I would go Gallup 3, Lamb 4. Actually, no, I'll go Logan Thomas 4 because I like the tight end filler. Lamb after that. So I'm probably just going to be lower on CeeDee Lamb than most. How are you viewing the pass catchers here?
I'd probably rank them the same, unfortunately, for the sake of discussion. But I think Amari Cooper is the best play. He does lead, like I said, in target share from Andy Dalton. He's been very efficient on them. Not as much downfield work, but we know that Amari Cooper still has some ability to break a big play. Terry McLaurin still feels like he has to do everything on his own. I don't think it's quite the same for Amari Cooper. The salary is a lot different as well. But I think Logan Thomas is very much in play. My worry with him is that his salary is $5,000, which makes him the least or the lowest salaried starting tight end, like relevant tight end of the six. I think they're just make it simple. There are 6 tight ends in play. He's the lowest salaried at $5,000. I think that might lead to his popularity rising just because you can spend the least and get a tight end. So that is a little bit problematic, but I think it's warranted too because he's ran at least 95% of the routes in all 3 of Alex Smith's starts after trending down. So it arrows back up on Logan Thomas. So I'm high on Logan Thomas as well.
I agree. One last thing on Amari. In the 5 games without Dak, he has 79, 85, 67, and 81 receiving yards. He has had double-digit FanDuel points in all but 1. And that game was on the road against Philly, against Darius Slay. Now he's at home. I think that we're justified in putting Amari above McLaurin. Once you consider salary, I think that's actually okay. All right, 1 game stack for you from this game. Go.
Dalton, Zeke, Cooper, Logan Thomas.
Man, that was mine. But I think that our takeaway from that discussion is that we should try to be overweight on the Cowboys, correct?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm learning. Okay. It's very easy to like the Texans more, but I think Dallas might be a little bit sneakier. It is a little harder to hit because they have more viable options. Even though we're low on CeeDee Lamb, it's not like we don't like him. I think that's fair. So it's a little bit trickier to hit that stack. But any Dalton Schultz, by the way?
No, I think he's, like you said, there are 6 relevant tight ends. I think there are 5.5, and he's a half.
Yeah, I would say the same.
Okay, let's move to Ravens at Steelers. Injuries to note here. J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram missed this game due to COVID-19. Also, Brandon Williams is out due to contact tracing from that. He was a high-risk contact. Calais Campbell missed practice again on Monday. Basically missed the past 3 games with the injury, and it sounds like he'll sit out again this week. On the Steelers side, Juju Smith-Schuster missed practice Monday with a foot injury. Stepped on a flag wrong during the game on Sunday and did not return. Now, Juju has missed like every Wednesday practice this year, so that's not noteworthy in a sense, but like he was listed as having a foot injury, which is why I think there's a chance that Juju sits. I would still probably put him towards like 70% to play, but there's a shot he sits. I think it's worth discussing how things change if he does sit. Betting numbers in this game right now, the total is 45. The spread is Pittsburgh -4, which I think is interesting. I think that's
so it's lowest total and largest spread, right?
Yeah, I didn't think about that. Also, the 2 best defenses by a mile on the entire slate. So are we ranking this game 3rd for stacking?
I would assume people still are drawn to it more than...
Because of the names?
I think so. Mm-hmm. But the reasons we're down on it are probably very similar. Primarily the defenses. I know there's like the theory that matchups don't matter, defenses don't matter, but they do to a degree, especially when they're outliers. These are both outlier defenses in a positive sense. They're both very good. And we just saw them play each other in week 8. The Steelers did win 28-24. So like there were points, sure, but if you actually look, and this is not predictive, it's just probably quite descriptive of what we could maybe expect, even if there are points. Nobody had a big game, basically. Lamar had 16.8, 2 FanDuel points. Gus Edwards, of course, had 14.7. Willie Snead, 13.1. J.K. Dobbins, 12.6. The Steelers' defense actually had 18, but Ben Roethlisberger was 15.28. James Conner, 13.5. Eric Ebron, 12.8. Claypool, 10.7. Juju, 10.4. Like, there were points, but these teams do kind of still spread the ball out. Pittsburgh's a little bit different because they're just throwing the ball a ton right now, and they are a little bit concentrated. And if you take Juju out, it's very different. We mentioned this yesterday on the recap show, but it's very different removing Juju Smith-Schuster from the Pittsburgh offense, still leaving them Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, Eric Ebron, than it is removing Kenny Golladay and having.
Are you implying that Chase Claypool is better than Marvin Hall?
I think it's fair.
Huh.
I think that's my take.
Okay, let's go back a little bit here.
Ask me next week.
Okay, fair enough. We want more data before we decide on this one, before we decide if Mapletron is better than Marvin Hall.
So I feel like even if this game puts up points, there might not be like a huge outing. And Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool can get there, sure, but like that's where I am.
We talk about the ability to burn me for not using you. There aren't a lot of guys here who have the ability to burn you for not using them. Lamar is, Claypool is, I think. Deontay, to an extent, I think is. But I think that's pretty much it. So let's talk about the headliner here, Gus Edwards. He is $5,200. There is no Ingram and no J.K. Dobbins, but Edwards is in. Now, Edwards is interesting because his snap rates, the past 5 games, are 44% to 32%, 38%, 23%, and 20%. Now, those 2 games in the 20s came with Mark Ingram back. That will go up this week. That is undoubted. That's not in doubt. In the 2 games with no Mark Ingram, Edwards ran 16 and 13 routes, but last week he ran just 4, whereas Justice Hill ran 6. That's a concern, because Justice Hill could be involved here. And when I initially saw that those guys were going to miss, I was like, okay, cool, 100% Gus Edwards. Now I'm still high on Gus Edwards, and again, ranking him second behind Zeke, assuming that there's no DeAndre Swift, but it's not 100% by any means, correct?
No, but I still think you're getting a very high floor of carries. We've seen Gus Edwards get double-digit carries. He actually had 16. He set season highs in carries, yardage on the ground against Pittsburgh. Did score in that game in Week 8. The issue, I think, that would come into play is, like you alluded to, not a whole lot of targets on the year for Gus Edwards, and if Pittsburgh does get out ahead, maybe Gus isn't that involved, but we are still looking at effectively one of the most situation-based run-heavy teams in the league. Even if Baltimore is trailing early, they're still going to use use Gus Edwards on the ground.
The first game against Pittsburgh, they threw the ball 36% of the time on early downs in the first half. That's a very, very low number. They're going to run, and Gus Edwards will be that guy.
And Dobbins had 15 carries in that game for 113.
Right, and I think Gus had 87 yards and a tutty. And he had 1 target too. So, hey, there we go. So I think Gus will probably wind up being 70%-ish.
Rostered, yeah. I don't
for us. Sorry, not public.
Yeah, I think somewhere in that ballpark. The question I was going to ask you is, what are the odds he burns you?
It's a good question, because he'd have to get 2 touchdowns to burn me, right?
If he were to get 20 carries, 100 yards is not out of the conversation. Again, we got to adjust this all for a small slate. Take DeAndre Swift out of the equation, like 100 yards and a touchdown, no receiving, 16 FanDuel points. That would be kind of burning you. That'd be hard to top. Yeah, because we only have so many guys. So
right,
I think in that sense, he's not going to go for 25, but like he can get you 16.
Yeah. So I'm not going to be like fading him.
No,
that's the correct consensus we're at here.
Yeah, I'm not fading him. I think that, yes, there are some red flags, but it would take both Pittsburgh flooring the Ravens and the Ravens to abandon everything they believe in and just start chucking the ball for Gus Edwards.
Also, we don't know that Justice Hill will get passing down work over Gus Edwards. Like, we don't know that. So, like, that's also a factor that have to work there as well. So, we like Gus. We're not recommending fading him, but, like, just beware that there are some red flags in the profile for sure. I think The guy on whom I will be most overweight in this game is Willie Snead. He is $5,300. And if you look at the games since their bye week, Snead has 23% of the Ravens' overall targets, second on the team behind Mark Andrews, who is at 24%. Snead leads the team in deep targets and red zone targets. He's at 35% deep, 31% in the red zone. Willie Snead is $5,300. I think that, like, if I have one lineup, I think after I get my stack in, because I'm probably not stacking this game with that one lineup, I think that Willie Snead might be the first guy I turn to. What about you?
Yeah, I think I'm there. It's a little scary just because this team does not want to throw the ball. Since the bye, Snead's averaging 6.3 targets per game, which, market share-wise, it sounds better, but adjusted for the volume, it's still not that great. There is some downfield work, though, which is nice. But I think Snead is the best receiver play probably, like, at his salary, because we're still not going to build around like a Terry McLaurin or anything like that.
Yeah, he has 7, 4, 7, and 7 targets, and he catches like everything because like he's a good receiver. I know that like we think of him as being a guy with no juice, but he had 106 yards against Pittsburgh in the first game they played. He had 64 yards and 2 touchdowns against New England. So like he's a legit player. So it's not like a Cole Beasley situation where I just like vomit every time I plug him in.
I was actually going to say, but Beasley had a good Thanksgiving last year.
Don't remind me. I would rather you really kept that to yourself. Let's not talk about that. Marquise Brown, like,
I think, yeah.
I will have some in like Lamar stacks, but if I didn't get there, it wouldn't break my heart. Because I think that like if we're talking like range of outcomes, he could be someone who has a really good game. But like, and I don't know, if people are totally out on Marquise Brown, then like, okay, 15% works. But it's just like, I'm banking on a role change effectively, and I don't want to do that.
So,
also, we're not calling him Hollywood Brown anymore. It's done. He's Marquise going forward, just for the record.
I wrote up the slate on numberFire, and I said effectively, like, conventional wisdom makes it sound like Marquise Brown, 3-game slate. He's one of the guys who can just destroy you. But throughout the year before this, I haven't been high on Marquise Brown. I have actual more reason to be low on Marquise Brown now.
Yeah, I mean, his role's gotten tangibly worse.
Yes.
Because we thought about him like before the first Steelers game. I was high on him there. We've got a lot of data since then. All the data says that they're not throwing the ball anymore, and that matters.
Yes. But the thing is, Marquise Brown showed up against the Dolphins in week 1 as a rookie and just went off in the first half. Since then, I think he's had like one ceiling game, and it just feels like because of his skill set, he is very boom or bust. He's mostly just bust because the offense and like I'm not trying to like
No, you're right. Yeah.
It's been a lot of bad weeks. The volume never really gets that high. He was getting like 8 targets a game for a while in that span, but Lamar is not efficient on deep passes this year. It's just that's the biggest differentiation between Lamar this year and last year. Lamar was throwing it on a dime last year to guys like Marquise Brown and just getting it downfield. He's been very inefficient. I mentioned that yesterday on the pod. He's down at the bottom, basically, with guys like Carson Wentz in terms of downfield passing. So that's the issue. I think Marquise Brown will probably be significantly more popular than he should be because he feels that way.
I don't think that's true because like I judge a lot of things based on Twitter sentiment because like that can dictate, like it can show you like how people feel about a guy. There has not been a positive word said about Marquise Brown in a month. So like I don't think he'll be more popular than he should.
It's extremely early, but according to fansharesports.com,
I am curious about this actually.
Marquise, look, it's very early. I'll say these numbers because they'll change. But Gus Edwards, for context, leads the slate with 6 tags.
Okay.
Terry McLaurin's at 4. Marquise Brown is tied for third with 3 tags. All
the sentiment has to be like 0%.
No,
right?
It's 100% positive.
Okay, so we're just going 100% Willie Snead. Like if people are going to use Marquise Brown, I am very okay not using him.
Well, they are because he still has that persona. And as much as we dig into the underlying data, and as much as the underlying data can be wrong, Marquise Brown could catch one deep pass for an 80-yard touchdown. Wouldn't surprise us at all. But that's not really how they're using him. and the volume is so low, the matchup is so tough that the odds he really destroys you, they're very low. He's just not the same Marquise Brown that he was last year.
I also think that if Brown winds up being popular, that adds more incentive to be high on Michael Gallup because they are effectively the same player, except Gallup is $200 cheaper and probably will be less popular. We've also seen Michael Gallup convert on the volume he's gotten this year. That might be the difference.
Yeah.
So there's that. Quarterbacks here. I think that ranking quarterbacks for this slate, Deshaun is 1 in a tier by himself. Lamar is 2 in a tier by himself.
Yes.
Ben Roethlisberger, if I fill out every lineup and have only Deshaun and Lamar, kind of okay with it. Where does Ben Roethlisberger settle in for you, and where is Lamar relative to Deshaun?
Same with you with Deshaun, tier 1, Lamar, tier 2. I mentioned this kind of as a joke, but it was also serious. Like, it feels like, okay, well, everyone's going to play, or, Deshaun's the best process play. Lamar obviously has that ceiling, but Ben is going to be the afterthought, and he's got all these great receivers, even without Juju. Juju might play, we don't know, but the odds that Ben puts up a huge game against Baltimore feel very low. He's been about league average in ADOT and downfield attempt rate. Yes, that can change. He can just get the ball into the hands of his playmakers. But in the 5 games with Claypool, Deontay, and Juju playing together after Deontay's return and after Chase Claypool broke out, Ben Roethlisberger's at 15.6, 15.3, 25, 29, and 17.7 FanDuel points without adjusting for like opponent or anything. The ceiling has just not really been there. Like, yes, 25.
Right, because the 2 25-point games came against the worst defenses in football, basically.
Right. So, it's only been there in select spots. A recent divisional rematch.
It's the only outdoor game on the slate.
It does not. Again, yes, we're looking at. I simulate stuff out in scenarios. Ben Roethlisberger just breaks the slate. It's possible. We're getting one instance. The most likely instance is not such that Ben Roethlisberger just destroys the slate.
So, you have 10 lineups. Are you using any that don't have Deshaun or Lamar?
At this point, no. And if I'm picking a third quarterback, I might go with Andy Dalton.
Okay, that's fair. I'm not going to push back on that because I think that's fine. If Galladay goes, I'd go Stafford, though, as my pivot.
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about James Conner because we have to. He's $6,700. We were kind of shocked on the Monday podcast with how low that was because I assumed I'd be out on him. That salary is low enough to get my attention because if we look at the 7 games since their bye week, James Conner actually is second on the slate in red zone market share. He is behind only Antonio Gibson. He's 4th in yards per game behind Swift, Zeke, and Gibson. 20.4 adjusted opportunities, a second behind Zeke if we assume that there is no DeAndre Swift. So, technically he grades out well. Technically they're a 4-point favorite. Technically the Ravens' rush defense is pretty bad right now with guys out. So that's why I put James Conner above Duke. But, I don't feel good about him. What are your thoughts on James Conner overall?
I probably am too low, but
it's more so that I hate Duke than I love James Conner, that I rank him above.
I think it's the same. I think we're saying the same thing, just flipping the guys. It's the same sentiment. We're not eager to play either of these guys.
Yeah.
James Conner there's a floor, and that has value, especially with unknowns and maybe not a whole lot of ceiling for other running backs on the slate. He can get targets. He's had multiple in 5 straight games, but he's not really the guy who's going to get you 60 receiving yards on.
Yeah, he's not getting creative targets.
And the rushing has been 13, 13, 9, 15 the past 4 games. Volume matters, and they're throwing the ball so much. I think they're 3rd in pass rate over the past 5 games with all those guys healthy. That hurts James Conner, it helps in the sense that they're moving the ball more efficiently because passing is, unless you're the Eagles, passing is more efficient than rushing. But
Free Miles Sanders.
like, yeah, James Conner can walk in 2 touchdowns, and we would be on tilt. But we're both going to use some of him. I think that's just the only really scenario where he puts up a game where you kind of regret it, though. And I do think it's more likely that James Conner scores twice than, let's say, like Adrian Peterson, because you could say, well, if anyone scores twice, they're going to be great plays. But like James Conner is not just a complete afterthought, but he's also not such that you should like feel eager to play him.
Yeah, so I think, or are you changing your running back rankings at all from what we discussed earlier? Because I'm still on Zeke, Gus, Gibson, Connor, Duke.
Yeah, I'll flip Connor over Duke, I guess.
Okay. Let's talk about the wide receivers then. Talk about Willie Snead. I think that he's the best play in this game, but obviously like Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool are good too. In the 5 games that everyone healthy, Deontay's at 25% of targets, 29% deep. Claypool was at 19% overall, but 34% deep, and he also gets those red zone rush attempts. Eric Ebron has a 15% target share in that time, but a 28% red zone target share. So I think all 3 are legitimately good options, despite my dissatisfaction with Ben. I would rank them for tournaments. Claypool 1. I actually think that Claypool is a really good play for this week. I think that he's my favorite play in the 6,000 range of wide receiver, above Amari by a tiny bit. I'll go Deontay. I don't know. Between Deontay and Amari, it's close. And Brandon Cooks. I don't know. I think that Chase Claypool is someone I want to try to be overweight on. What are your thoughts on the pass catchers here for Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I would just take it in the sense of who's most likely to put up a huge game. That's Chase Claypool. The better floor belongs to Deontay Johnson.
Correct.
I would also think if you take Juju out, it probably benefits Deontay more for more similar usage.
I feel like it benefits Claypool more because of the profile, because Claypool's flaw is his floor. His floor is not as good as Deontay's. But if you get in more targets, his floor goes up.
But from like a football standpoint,
sure.
If you take Juju's targets, I would assume
I think Ebron actually is the biggest benefactor there.
That's true. But yeah, I would go Claypool number 1. But I think just for tournaments, if I'm building one lineup with friends, family, whatever it is, I would go Deontay Johnson. I think he's the safest play. But I'm with you. Big tournaments, Claypool would be the number 1.
Claypool has had 15 or more points in 4 games this year. He has had, he had the 39-point game, obviously. So 15 or more points, 4 different times. Deontay, I think, has done it his last 2. Let me pull this up here. Stalling. My computer is slow. Deontay's done it 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So they've both done it 4 times. But I would assume that Deontay will be the more popular player, correct?
Yeah, I would think so too.
Okay, so that's why I want to go play Claypool. I think that the ceiling is a little bit higher, like the 90th percentile outcome is higher, and I think the popularity will be lower. And as a result, I want to go with Chase Claypool. Ranking the tight ends,
I was going to ask you to do that.
I think just because the salary is so good, I might go Logan Thomas 1.
That's where I am.
Okay, cool. I go Eric Ebron 2, actually. If Galladay sits, I'd go Hawkinson 2, though. No. I would go Thomas 1, Ebron 2, Andrews 3, Hawkinson 4, Akins 5.
I think it's a coin flip between Ebron and Hawkinson for me. I think Mark Andrews is by far the most fascinating, but I don't really...
His salary shouldn't be $800 higher than Hawkinson's.
I mean, he's like the one guy getting somewhat solid volume. Like, Willie Sheen's getting good volume, but like Mark Andrews is... I think it's justified to get access to what he can do, and what he can do is be as involved as he was last week. 7 targets, getting downfield work on that long touchdown, 96 yards. If one tight end hit 80 receiving yards, I would bet 9 times out of 10 it's Mark Andrews on this slate. So I do think he's viable for that, but factoring in the positional volatility that is tight end, I would go Logan Thomas number 1, probably Ebron 2, Hawkinson, and then Andrews. Akins is more of like a, just so I'm not super heavy on Logan Thomas, I guess.
I think the other thing too is this is kind of similar to the running back discussion we had at the beginning, where tight end might be just the position that you include in game stacks. Like maybe every time you use a tight end, it's whichever game you're stacking for that specific one, just because tight end is so touchdown dependent.
Yeah.
Like you're kind of banking on it being a high scoring game, which might actually wind up lowering me on Ebron and maybe increasing my exposure to Akins and Hawkinson. But like if I'm ranking them without considering that, I would go Thomas, then Ebron, et cetera, et cetera. But
yeah, I think we're going to be just lower on Mark Andrews than we should be for what his ceiling is relative to everyone else. He's really the only guy who can get you 20 FanDuel points in a game if things go his way. He can score twice. He has yardage upside, but to build around Mark Andrews is not something I will consider doing. Although I wouldn't entirely rule out just to differentiate, like flexing Mark Andrews if I'm playing Logan Thomas, just so that I'm not all over Amari and Deontay. Like, I don't love it.
Because I think then you're kind of comparing Mark Andrews to Deontay and Amari, and like, there is a situation in which he outscores him, so that's fair.
So, like, is it likely? No. Or is he a better play at the flex than those two guys? No. But he's the one option who at least is in that consideration. Like,
you're also comparing him to Antonio Gibson and James Conner, and there's a situation where he outscores them too. So that's actually interesting and fair.
So I think that we're naturally too low on Andrews just because that's how we approach tight end, but he's the one guy, obviously based on salary, but I do think that on a small slate, he's got more appeal than we would probably like to admit.
I think the scary thing is that I'm decently high on Gus Edwards, Willie Snead, and Andrews, but I'm not as high on this game. So that's a little bit scary to me. Maybe I should just be higher on this game, or maybe I need to be lower on them. I don't know. One game stack here. What you doing?
I would go Lamar, Mark Andrews, Gus, Claypool.
I would go with same, except instead of Andrews going Snead. I think that Snead is a really, really good play.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. Also defense. I think the Ravens are a great defense. I know that's probably a terrible idea given the Steelers are undefeated, given that Ben gets rid of the ball very quickly, but they're $4,100. They're in the least attractive game to me. They're a good defense, even without the dudes, and Ben's dropping back a lot, which could benefit them from a volume perspective. So I go Baltimore 1. What about you at defense?
I haven't looked enough.
I think the Dallas defense is also pretty fine.
I was going to kind of lean toward Dallas for the savings. Yeah. I think a lot of people will do that. I will say I'm probably not going to be very in on Washington. I think they're probably at that salary based on what we've kind of seen from Dallas for a while. So I think I
don't mind it because their pass rush can definitely get there, and Dalton can mess up. So I'll probably get there.
Yeah. I think they might be the most appealing again, I haven't really studied this, but they might be the most appealing defense to stack against the opposing offense, because Dalton could probably like get a fumble 6, but still put up points and stuff. So
yeah. Okay. Any final thoughts for you on this slate before we close up shop and get ready for tomorrow?
I think it's, again, just really important to take some stands. We talked about the positives and really the negatives for all 6 offenses, but if you're building 10 lineups, you can't play everyone, and it's going to suck to see guys you don't have rostered scoring touchdowns. But I think you really need to kind of pick a core, pick a way that the 3 games break, and stick to that, and differentiate a little bit from that.
I would also say manual. I've said this a couple times this year, but it's a really helpful exercise to manually rank your players based on salary. That way you know to which ones you want to commit, to which ones you're okay being lower on. Because, like, in theory, like, oh, man, James Conner could do well, but if I rank him 5th or 4th or whatever, then it's more okay to miss out. So I would actually manually rank each position and go from there. That is all the time that we have for today. But again, we are back again tomorrow for the Week 12 main slate preview. That is at 10 a.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube page. Make sure you are subscribed there. And also check out the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed if you're checking it out after the fact. Our listener league is posted again, FanDuel.com/league/listener league, $5 entry, 3 entries max. There is no rake here, so all the entry fees go right back to you. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, busy guy for today. He is our video producer. Thank you, Cal, as always, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Have a fantastic Thanksgiving. Good luck to you Thursday. We'll talk to you again tomorrow to break down the main slate. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.